My name is Sofia Martinez, and I am 28 years old. 13 years ago, my mother left me stranded at Miami International Airport with nothing but a backpack and $50 while she boarded a first-class flight to the Bahamas with her new husband. That moment of abandonment set off a chain of events that would eventually expose the darkest family secrets and deliver the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. What started as the worst day of my life became the catalyst for uncovering lies that destroyed my entire family. Hey everyone, watching from around the world. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, please hit that like button if you have ever felt abandoned by family, and do not forget to subscribe because this tale has more twists than a roller coaster. Trust me, you will want to see how karma comes full circle in the most unexpected way. Now let me take you back to that terrible day that changed everything. The fluorescent lights of Miami International Airport buzzed overhead as I stood frozen in Terminal D, watching my mother walk away without looking back. Rebecca Martinez, the woman who gave birth to me, had just informed me that there was no room for me on their honeymoon flight because her new husband Marcus wanted privacy. She handed me $50 and told me to figure it out, as if a 15-year-old girl could simply manifest a place to live. Marcus Thompson stood beside her, adjusting his expensive watch and checking his phone with the indifference of someone stepping over a homeless person. He had swept my mother off her feet 6 months after my father died in a construction accident, promising her a life of luxury and adventure. What I did not know then was that this abandonment was not spontaneous cruelty, but a calculated move in a much larger scheme. I spent the first night sleeping in the airport bathroom, using my backpack as a pillow, and trying to ignore the janitors who gave me pitying looks. The $50 bought me airport food for 2 days before I swallowed my pride and called my Aunt Carmen, my father's sister, who lived in Orlando. Carmen had always been the black sheep of our family, working as a paralegal and living in a modest apartment, but she drove 3 hours to pick me up without asking a single question about why I was alone. During the car ride to Orlando, I told Carmen everything. How Marcus had moved into our house immediately after the wedding, how he convinced my mother to sell my father's tools and motorcycle, and how he constantly made comments about me being a burden. Carmen listened with a grim expression that I did not understand at the time, occasionally muttering things in Spanish that sounded like curses. Living with Carmen opened my eyes to a different way of being treated. She enrolled me in a good high school, helped me get a part-time job at a local bookstore, and never once made me feel like an inconvenience. She also began teaching me about legal procedures, showing me how to research public records and understand court documents. What I thought was just her trying to give me useful skills was actually preparation for something much bigger. The first crack in the foundation came when I turned 18. Carmen sat me down with a manila folder full of documents and photographs. Inside were copies of insurance policies, bank statements, and legal papers that made my blood run cold. My father had not just died in a construction accident, he had been killed due to safety violations at a worksite owned by Thompson Construction Company, Marcus Thompson's business. The insurance settlement from my father's death was substantial, nearly $800,000 that should have been held in trust for me as his sole heir. However, the documents showed that my mother had signed papers transferring all rights to Marcus just 2 weeks before their wedding. The marriage was not a whirlwind romance, it was a calculated theft orchestrated by the man responsible for my father's death. Carmen explained that she had been investigating Marcus since the day my mother announced their engagement. As a paralegal, she had access to legal databases and connections in the courthouse that allowed her to piece together his history. Marcus Thompson had a pattern of targeting widows of men who died in his construction accidents, marrying them quickly, and stealing their settlements before disappearing. I was not his first victim. I was just the latest in a long line of families he had destroyed. The photographs showed other women, other children, all abandoned after Marcus had drained their resources. There was Linda Patterson, whose husband died in a scaffold collapse, left homeless with 3 kids after Marcus emptied their joint bank account. There was Maria Gonzalez, who lost her home and custody of her children when Marcus disappeared with her settlement money. Each story was a mirror of my own, each family destroyed by the same predator who had killed my father and stolen my inheritance. But the most damaging evidence was a recorded phone conversation Carmen had obtained through her legal contacts. Marcus was bragging to someone about how easy it was to manipulate grieving widows, how he had perfected the art of playing the caring stepfather while planning his exit strategy. His voice was cold and calculating as he described my mother as his biggest score, yet laughing about how stupid she was to sign over everything without reading the fine print. I listened to that recording 3 times each playback, making me angrier and more determined. This man had not just abandoned me at an airport, he had murdered my father, stolen my inheritance, and was probably planning to disappear once he had squeezed every last penny from my mother. The worst part was knowing that my mother was complicit in my abandonment, choosing luxury and false promises over her own daughter. Carmen revealed that she had been building a legal case for months, working with prosecutors and federal investigators who were tracking Marcus across multiple states. But she needed my help to make the case stick. As his stepdaughter and the rightful heir to the stolen money, my testimony would be crucial in bringing him down. More importantly, I was the key to exposing his entire operation and saving other families from the same fate. The plan Carmen proposed was risky but necessary. I would have to reconnect with my mother and Marcus, pretending to forgive them while gathering evidence of their ongoing crimes. It would mean swallowing my anger and playing the role of the grateful daughter who had learned her lesson about family loyalty. The thought of facing them again made me sick, but knowing that other families were in danger gave me the strength to consider it. That night, I stared at the ceiling of Carmen's spare bedroom and made my decision. Marcus Thompson had taken everything from me, my father, my inheritance, my mother, and 3 years of my life. But he had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He had underestimated the power of a daughter seeking justice for her father's murder, and he had no idea that his next victim was about to become his worst nightmare. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I had never experienced before. The grief and confusion that had clouded my thinking for 3 years had crystallized into something much more powerful: calculated determination. Carmen found me at her kitchen table, surrounded by the evidence files, making detailed notes about Marcus's patterns and timeline. My plan began with research. Using the legal database access Carmen provided, I spent weeks mapping Marcus's entire criminal history. Each case file revealed more sophisticated layers of his operation. He did not just target random widows. He specifically sought out women whose husbands died in his construction accidents, women who were isolated and vulnerable, women with substantial insurance settlements and minimal family support. The pattern was sickeningly precise. Marcus would appear at funerals offering comfort and practical help during the grieving process. He would gradually insert himself into their lives, handling legal paperwork and financial decisions while positioning himself as their savior. Within months, he would propose marriage, always insisting on quick ceremonies and immediate access to joint bank accounts. Then came the systematic draining of resources, followed by abandonment once the money was gone. But Marcus had evolved his methods over the years. His latest victims were not just losing money, they were losing their children too. Court documents showed that he had been manipulating custody situations, convincing mothers to sign over parental rights or abandon their children entirely. Some of these children had simply vanished from the system with no record of where they ended up. This revelation changed everything. I was not just seeking revenge for personal wrongs, I was potentially saving lives. Carmen connected me with Detective Sarah Williams, a specialist in financial crimes who had been tracking Marcus across 3 states. Detective Williams explained that they had been building a federal case for over a year, but Marcus was careful never to leave enough evidence for prosecution. The detective's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to catch Marcus in the act of stealing from my mother, we would use me as bait to expose his entire network. The plan required me to reconnect with my mother and Marcus, but not as a victim seeking reconciliation. Instead, I would approach them as a successful young woman who had clearly thrived without them, making myself an attractive new target for manipulation. Carmen helped me construct my new identity carefully. Using my savings from 3 years of work and a small scholarship, I enrolled in community college business courses while maintaining my job at the bookstore. I created social media profiles showcasing a lifestyle that appeared more prosperous than reality, posting photos of nice dinners and small luxuries that suggested access to money. The psychological preparation was the hardest part. I had to learn to suppress my anger and disgust, to smile convincingly while looking at the man who killed my father. Carmen arranged sessions with a therapist who specialized in undercover work, helping me develop coping strategies for the emotional manipulation I would face. After 6 weeks of preparation, I was ready to make contact. I chose to approach through my mother's sister, Aunt Linda, who had maintained minimal contact with my mother despite disapproving of her choices. Linda was shocked to hear from me, but agreed to pass along a message that I was doing well and missed my family. The response came faster than expected. My mother called me within hours, her voice bright with artificial warmth as she expressed how much she had missed me. She claimed that Marcus had convinced her I needed tough love to become independent, and she was so proud of how well I had turned out. The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost admired her ability to rewrite history. Marcus got on the phone to add his own performance, praising my resilience and suggesting we meet for dinner to celebrate my success. His voice carried the same calculated charm I remembered, but now I could hear the predatory undertones that had been invisible to my 15-year-old ears. He was already evaluating me as a potential asset, probing for information about my financial situation and future plans. We arranged to meet at an upscale restaurant in Miami Neutral Territory that would allow Detective Williams and her team to monitor our interaction. I spent hours preparing for that dinner, practicing responses to likely questions and memorizing the details of my fabricated success story. Carmen drilled me on staying in character while wearing the recording device that would capture everything. The night before the dinner, Carmen gave me a letter my father had written for my 18th birthday, something she had saved for when I was ready to read it. His words were prophetic in their wisdom about choosing family carefully and standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. He wrote about hoping I would grow up to be someone who protected others from harm, someone who would not let injustice stand unchallenged. Reading those words gave me the final piece of emotional armor I needed. This was not just about revenge anymore. It was about honoring my father's memory and protecting future victims. I was carrying forward his legacy of standing up to bullies and defending those who could not defend themselves. The recording equipment was sophisticated but nearly invisible, embedded in jewelry and clothing that appeared completely normal. Detective Williams walked me through the legal requirements for evidence collection, emphasizing that I needed to let Marcus incriminate himself rather than leading him into admissions. The goal was to get him talking about his methods, his other victims, and most importantly, his plans for my mother's remaining assets. I practiced my cover story until it became second nature. I was a successful business student with a part-time marketing job that paid well enough to afford a nice apartment and car. I had forgiven my family for the airport incident, recognizing it as a misunderstanding that ultimately helped me grow into an independent woman. I was grateful for the life lessons and ready to rebuild our relationship. But underneath the performance, I was planning something much more comprehensive than Detective Williams realized. While the legal case would handle Marcus's prosecution, I had my own plans for ensuring that justice reached every corner of his operation. Some crimes required more than prison time. They required complete destruction of the systems that enabled them. As I drove toward Miami for our reunion dinner, I thought about all the families Marcus had destroyed and all the children he had abandoned. Tomorrow night, his reign of terror would begin to crumble, and I would be the one holding the sledgehammer. The reunion dinner took place at Ocean Prime, an expensive seafood restaurant where Marcus could display his wealth and my mother could feel important. I arrived early to settle my nerves and review the recording device one final time with Detective Williams, who was positioned at a nearby table with her partner, both posing as a couple enjoying their anniversary. My mother looked older than her 45 years, with the hollow beauty of someone who had traded substance for superficial luxury. Her designer dress and expensive jewelry could not hide the nervousness in her eyes or the way she kept glancing at Marcus for approval before speaking. Marcus himself appeared exactly as I remembered, tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never facing consequences for his actions. The initial conversation was a masterclass in manipulation. Marcus immediately took control, ordering wine and appetizers without consulting anyone else while praising my apparent success and maturity. He asked probing questions about my job, my living situation, and my financial prospects, all disguised as fatherly concern for my well-being. My mother played her role perfectly, expressing regret for our separation while emphasizing how proud she was of my independence. I stuck to my script describing my business courses and marketing position with just enough detail to sound legitimate. When Marcus suggested I might benefit from investment advice, I expressed enthusiasm while carefully avoiding specific numbers about my assets. The recording device captured every word as he began outlining various financial strategies that would require pooling resources for maximum return. But the real breakthrough came when Marcus started drinking more heavily and began sharing stories about his business philosophy. He explained his belief that family resources should be managed collectively, with the most experienced person making decisions for everyone's benefit. He described situations where he had helped other families optimize their financial positions, always positioning himself as the generous benefactor rather than the predator. As the evening progressed, Marcus became increasingly comfortable and began dropping hints about his broader network. He mentioned other widows he had helped, other children who had benefited from his tough love approach to independence. He spoke about properties in different states, investment opportunities that required quick action, and the importance of trusting family with sensitive financial information. The most damning moment came when my mother excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Marcus and me alone. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he explained that my mother was not as financially sophisticated as she needed to be in their new life together. He suggested that I might be able to help them manage certain assets that required a younger person's name for tax purposes, offering me a percentage of profits in exchange for my cooperation. When my mother returned, Marcus smoothly shifted the conversation back to family reconciliation, but I had heard enough to understand the scope of his operation. He was not just stealing from individual families. He was running a complex financial scheme that used multiple victims' identities to hide assets and avoid taxation. My mother was not just his latest victim. She was an active participant in defrauding other families. After dinner, they invited me to visit their house the following weekend, eager to show me their new lifestyle and discuss future opportunities for family cooperation. I accepted enthusiastically, already planning how to use that visit to gather more evidence. As we parted ways, Marcus handed me his business card and suggested I research some investment opportunities he had mentioned, providing me with a direct entry point into his financial records. The drive back to Orlando with Detective Williams was electric with possibility. The recording had captured enough evidence to begin building conspiracy charges, but more importantly, it had revealed the existence of Marcus's larger network. Williams explained that federal investigators had been tracking similar schemes in other states, and my evidence might be the key to connecting multiple cases into a comprehensive prosecution. Over the following week, I threw myself into researching the investment opportunities Marcus had mentioned. Using the business databases at school and Carmen's legal resources, I began mapping the financial structure of his operation. The complexity was staggering: shell companies in multiple states, real estate holdings under various names, and investment accounts that moved money between victims faster than authorities could track. But the most disturbing discovery came when I started researching the other families Marcus had mentioned. 3 of the women he claimed to have helped had died under suspicious circumstances within months of their marriages to him. Their deaths had been ruled accidents or natural causes, but the timing was too convenient to ignore. Life insurance policies had paid out substantial sums that disappeared into Marcus's network of accounts. Carmen connected me with a private investigator named Jake Morrison, a former FBI agent who specialized in complex financial crimes. Morrison had been tracking Marcus for over 2 years, working on behalf of families trying to recover stolen assets. He showed me photographs and documents that painted an even darker picture than I had imagined. Morrison explained that Marcus was part of an organized network that targeted vulnerable families across the southeastern United States. Construction accidents were not random tragedies. They were deliberately caused to create widows who could be exploited. Safety violations were ignored, equipment was sabotaged, and workers were placed in dangerous situations to generate the insurance claims that funded the entire operation. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Morrison estimated that Marcus and his associates had stolen over $10 million from more than 30 families over the past 8 years. They had caused the deaths of at least 15 men, abandoned dozens of children, and destroyed entire communities in their pursuit of insurance money and settlement funds. But Morrison also revealed that the network was vulnerable because of its success. The more money they stole, the more attention they attracted from federal investigators. Several associates had been arrested in other states, and prosecutors were building a massive racketeering case that would bring down the entire operation. My evidence could be the final piece needed to secure convictions against the leadership level. The weekend visit to my mother's house was scheduled for Saturday, giving me 5 days to prepare for the most important performance of my life. Morrison and Detective Williams worked together to design a comprehensive surveillance operation that would document everything Marcus revealed about his network and methods. The plan was ambitious, but necessary. I would wear multiple recording devices and a GPS tracker while visiting the house. Morrison's team would monitor from nearby locations, ready to intervene if my safety was threatened. The goal was to get Marcus talking about his other victims, his future plans, and most importantly, the location of hidden assets that could be recovered for the families he had destroyed. Carmen helped me prepare emotionally for what I might discover about my mother's level of involvement. The evidence suggested she was not an innocent victim, but an active participant who had chosen greed over protecting her own daughter. Whatever I learned about her choices, I needed to remain focused on gathering evidence and protecting other families from the same fate. As Saturday approached, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. 30 families were depending on my ability to expose this network and recover their stolen money. Dozens of abandoned children needed to see that justice was possible, that predators could be brought down by their victims' determination and courage. The night before the visit, I read my father's letter again, drawing strength from his words about standing up to bullies and protecting the innocent. Tomorrow, I would walk into the house of the man who killed him, wearing hidden cameras and recording devices ready to gather the evidence that would destroy the network that had caused so much suffering. Marcus Thompson thought he was manipulating another naive victim, but he had no idea he was about to face the full fury of a daughter seeking justice for her father's murder and redemption for every family he had destroyed. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect Miami weather that made everything feel surreal. I drove toward my mother's house in Coral Gables, a sprawling estate that my father's insurance money had purchased, while Morrison's surveillance team positioned themselves throughout the neighborhood. The recording devices felt heavier than they actually were, each one a reminder of the dozens of families counting on this operation's success. The house was everything Marcus had promised my mother: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a pristine pool. My mother greeted me at the door wearing a flowing sundress that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. Her embrace felt hollow, performed for an audience she did not know was watching. Marcus appeared moments later, dressed in casual luxury and carrying a thick portfolio of investment documents. He had prepared an elaborate presentation about wealth building and family financial planning, clearly intending to recruit me into whatever scheme required a younger person's participation. The dining room table was covered with charts, legal documents, and photographs of properties in different states. The first hour of the visit proceeded exactly as Detective Williams had predicted. Marcus outlined various investment opportunities that required family cooperation, emphasizing the importance of trust and discretion in financial matters. He showed me photographs of other families he claimed to have helped, spinning elaborate stories about their success, while the recording devices captured every fabricated detail. But the real revelation came when Marcus opened a laptop and began showing me the actual financial structure of his operation. He was so confident in his ability to manipulate me that he revealed everything: shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, offshore accounts in the Caribbean, and a network of associates who moved money between different schemes to avoid detection. The most shocking moment occurred when he pulled up spreadsheets showing the profits from each family he had targeted. My father's death was listed as case number 14, with detailed breakdowns of insurance payouts, asset liquidation, and profit distribution among network members. Seeing my family's tragedy reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet filled me with rage that I struggled to control. Marcus explained that the network operated like a business franchise with different teams responsible for creating accidents, identifying targets, and executing the financial theft. He described the process with the casual efficiency of someone discussing stock portfolios, completely detached from the human cost of his crimes. When I asked about the children who had been abandoned, Marcus shrugged dismissively and explained that teaching independence was actually a favor to young people who needed to learn self-reliance. He claimed that most of them were better off without the burden of family dependency, conveniently ignoring the trauma and poverty his abandonment had caused. My mother's participation became clear during lunch when she casually mentioned helping Marcus research new targets through social media and public records. She described her role in identifying grieving widows who appeared financially vulnerable, gathering information about their assets and family situations. She had become a predator herself, using her experience as a victim to help destroy other families. The afternoon took a darker turn when Marcus received a phone call from one of his associates. The conversation, clearly audible to my recording devices, involved planning another construction accident in Jacksonville. They discussed which safety violations to ignore, which workers to place in dangerous positions, and how to time the accident for maximum insurance impact. I excused myself to use the bathroom, using the opportunity to send a coded text message to Morrison's team about the immediate danger to workers in Jacksonville. Federal agents would need to intervene within hours to prevent another deliberate murder, adding urgency to an already tense situation. When I returned, Marcus had opened a bottle of expensive champagne to celebrate what he believed was my recruitment into the family business. He handed me legal documents that would give him power of attorney over my assets, explaining that this was standard procedure for family investment partnerships. The papers were expertly crafted to appear legitimate while actually transferring complete control of my finances to Marcus. As I pretended to review the documents, Marcus continued revealing details about the network's operations. He bragged about corrupting building inspectors, bribing insurance investigators, and eliminating witnesses who became problematic. The recording devices captured every admission, building an airtight case for racketeering, conspiracy, and multiple counts of premeditated murder. The most devastating moment came when Marcus showed me photographs from a recent vacation in the Bahamas, the same trip they had taken while abandoning me at the airport. But these were not just vacation photos. They were celebration pictures from a meeting with other network leaders. My abandonment had been timed to coincide with a planning session for their next phase of operations. My mother laughed as she described how easy it had been to manipulate me throughout my childhood, keeping me isolated and dependent so that my abandonment would be more traumatic and complete. She explained that traumatized children were less likely to seek help or be believed by authorities, making them safer targets for abandonment. But Marcus made his fatal mistake when he began describing his plans for expansion into new territories. He pulled out maps showing construction projects in Georgia and South Carolina with detailed information about worker demographics and family situations. He was planning to kill dozens more people, destroy scores of additional families, and steal millions more dollars. As the sun began to set, Marcus suggested we finalize my participation by signing the legal documents and transferring seed money into the investment accounts. He had prepared everything for immediate execution, confident that his manipulation had succeeded completely. The recording devices had captured more than enough evidence to destroy the entire network. I signed the documents with a steady hand, knowing they were worthless forgeries that would never be processed. Marcus raised his glass in a toast to family partnership and shared prosperity, completely unaware that federal agents were already surrounding the house. The celebration lasted exactly long enough for him to incriminate himself beyond any possibility of plea bargaining. When the doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock, Marcus assumed it was another associate joining our celebration. My mother went to answer the door, her voice bright with anticipation as she invited the visitors inside. The look of confusion on her face when Detective Williams entered the room was almost worth 3 years of abandonment and betrayal. Marcus stood slowly, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally resignation as he realized the scope of his exposure. The recording devices had captured everything: confessions to murder, detailed descriptions of fraud schemes, evidence of ongoing conspiracies, and plans for future crimes. There would be no plea bargains, no reduced sentences, and no escape from justice. As federal agents placed handcuffs on both Marcus and my mother, I felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. The network that had destroyed so many families was finally broken, and the victims would have their chance for recovery and closure. The arrest scene unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Federal agents flooded the house from multiple entrances while Detective Williams read Miranda rights to Marcus and my mother. The surveillance equipment Morrison's team had installed captured every moment as the reality of their situation dawned on both of them. Marcus maintained his composure longer than my mother, who immediately began crying and claiming she had been manipulated and coerced. She pointed at Marcus and insisted she was just another victim, conveniently forgetting the recordings that captured her enthusiastic participation in targeting other families. Her performance was pathetic and desperate, a pale shadow of the confidence she had displayed just hours earlier. The evidence collection process took most of the night. Federal agents photographed and cataloged every document Marcus had shown me, seized multiple computers and phones, and removed boxes of financial records that detailed the network's operations. The laptop containing the victim spreadsheets became Exhibit A, in what prosecutors would later describe as one of the most comprehensive financial crime cases in federal history. Within hours of the arrests coordinated, raids were taking place in 6 different states. The Jacksonville construction site was shut down just hours before the planned accident, saving the lives of workers who had no idea they were targeted for death. Other network members were arrested at their homes' offices, and in some cases, while actively scouting new victims. The media coverage began immediately, with news crews gathering outside the Coral Gables house before the evidence collection was complete. The story of a daughter bringing down the network that killed her father captured national attention, inspiring other victims to come forward with additional evidence and testimony. But the most satisfying moment came when I called Carmen from the police station where I was giving my formal statement. Her voice broke with emotion as I described Marcus's confession to murdering my father, finally providing the closure she had sought for 3 years. The man who had destroyed our family was facing multiple life sentences, and the evidence would ensure he never hurt anyone again. Detective Williams explained that the federal case would likely take months to fully prosecute, given the complexity of the charges and the number of victims involved. Marcus was facing charges for racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, and dozens of counts of theft and insurance fraud. My mother faced similar charges, though prosecutors indicated they might consider reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against other network members. The financial recovery process began immediately with federal agents tracing stolen assets through the maze of shell companies and offshore accounts Marcus had created. Preliminary estimates suggested that over $8 million could be recovered and returned to victim families, though the process would take years to complete. Morrison revealed that my evidence had broken open cases in multiple jurisdictions that had been stalled for lack of witness testimony. The recordings of Marcus describing specific murders provided prosecutors with the detailed confessions they needed to pursue death penalty charges in states where those crimes had occurred. But the most emotional moment came when other victim families began reaching out through Morrison and Detective Williams. Children who had been abandoned by Marcus's network found each other through support groups and social media, creating a community of survivors who understood exactly what we had all endured. Linda Patterson, the woman whose husband died in the scaffold collapse, called me personally to express her gratitude for bringing down the network that had destroyed her family. Her 3 children, now teenagers, had struggled with poverty and trauma for years, while Marcus lived in luxury funded by their father's death. The possibility of financial recovery meant they could finally afford college and rebuild their lives. Maria Gonzalez sent a handwritten letter describing how Marcus's abandonment had forced her to work 3 jobs while fighting to regain custody of her children. The evidence I had gathered would help her lawsuit against the construction company and potentially restore the financial security that Marcus had stolen from her family. But not every story had the possibility of a happy ending. Morrison showed me files for families where victims had died by suicide after losing everything to Marcus's schemes. Parents who blamed themselves for their children's abandonment, children who grew up believing they were unwanted burdens, and entire communities that had been devastated by deliberate construction accidents that were dismissed as workplace negligence. The psychological impact of the revelations was overwhelming. Learning that my abandonment was not spontaneous cruelty, but part of a calculated scheme that had targeted dozens of families changed how I understood my own trauma. I was not uniquely rejected or specially worthless. I was simply the latest victim in a systematic campaign of destruction. Carmen arranged for me to begin therapy with a specialist who worked with victims of organized crime. The sessions helped me process the anger and grief that had been driving me for years, transforming those emotions into a sense of purpose and commitment to helping other survivors heal. The legal proceedings moved forward with remarkable speed given the overwhelming evidence and the cooperation of multiple jurisdictions. Marcus's lawyers attempted various defense strategies from claiming mental illness to arguing that his victims were willing participants, but the recordings made their task impossible. My mother's defense took a different approach, painting her as another victim who had been manipulated and coerced by Marcus's sophisticated emotional manipulation. Her lawyers produced testimony from psychologists about trauma bonding and financial abuse, hoping to generate sympathy for her situation. But the prosecution had recordings of her enthusiastic participation in targeting other families, her casual discussion of abandoning me, and her detailed knowledge of the network's criminal operations. The jury heard her laugh about my trauma and describe me as a burden that needed to be eliminated for her new life to succeed. The trial became a media sensation with coverage focusing on the scope of the network's crimes and the courage of victims who testified against their attackers. Families traveled from across the country to attend hearings and support each other through the legal process. But the most powerful testimony came from the children who had been abandoned by the network. Young adults who had survived homelessness, foster care, and poverty stood before the court to describe how Marcus's crimes had shaped their entire lives. Their voices were steady and strong, proving that his attempts to destroy them had ultimately failed. As the trial progressed, additional evidence emerged about the full scope of the network's operations. Financial records revealed connections to organized crime groups, international money laundering operations, and political corruption that reached into state and local government offices. The web of criminality was so extensive that federal prosecutors expanded the investigation into a multi-agency task force involving the FBI, DEA, IRS, and Department of Labor. What had begun as a financial crimes case had evolved into one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in decades. The verdicts came down on a Tuesday morning in late November, exactly 1 year after my reunion dinner with Marcus and my mother. I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse, surrounded by other victim families who had become my chosen family through shared trauma and collective healing. Marcus Thompson was convicted on all 47 counts, including racketeering conspiracy to commit murder and multiple counts of fraud and theft. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, calling his crimes a systematic campaign of terror against vulnerable families. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read, maintaining the cold detachment that had defined his entire criminal career. My mother received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy, with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years. Her defense strategy of claiming victimhood failed completely when faced with recordings of her enthusiastic participation in targeting other families. The judge noted that her betrayal of maternal instincts made her crimes particularly heinous and deserving of severe punishment. But the real victory came in the financial recovery process. Federal agents had successfully traced and frozen over $9 million in assets hidden throughout Marcus's network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money would be distributed to victim families based on their losses, providing long overdue compensation for years of suffering and poverty. My share of the recovered funds was substantial, including not only my father's original insurance settlement, but also punitive damages for the additional crimes Marcus had committed against our family. The money meant I could finish college debt-free and establish the foundation I had been planning throughout the trial process. The Sofia Martinez Foundation for Crime Victims became operational 6 months after the verdicts, providing financial assistance and legal support for families affected by organized financial crimes. Carmen left her paralegal job to become the foundation's executive director, using her legal expertise to help other victims navigate complex recovery processes. Detective Williams joined the foundation's board of directors, bringing her law enforcement connections and investigative skills to help identify and prosecute other criminal networks. Morrison expanded his private investigation practice to work exclusively on foundation cases, tracking stolen assets and building evidence for prosecution. The foundation's first major success came when we helped expose a similar network operating in Texas and Louisiana. 3 families had contacted us with stories that sounded familiar: construction accidents followed by whirlwind romances, quick marriages, and systematic theft of insurance settlements. Our investigation led to federal raids that prevented dozens of additional crimes and saved countless lives. But the most meaningful work involved supporting the children who had been abandoned by criminal networks. We established scholarship programs, counseling services, and mentorship opportunities that helped survivors rebuild their lives and pursue their dreams despite their traumatic backgrounds. Linda Patterson's eldest daughter received a foundation scholarship to study engineering, choosing to focus on construction safety in honor of her father's memory. Maria Gonzalez used foundation legal services to successfully regain custody of her children and recover enough assets to purchase a home for their reunited family. The ripple effects of our case continued expanding as federal prosecutors used our evidence to build cases against criminal networks in other regions. What had begun as my quest for justice became a national movement to protect vulnerable families from systematic exploitation. My relationship with Carmen deepened into something far stronger than blood family connections. She had sacrificed her own security to protect me when my biological mother abandoned me, and together we had built something meaningful from our shared trauma. She became the mother figure I had always needed, someone who chose to love and support me, rather than someone obligated by biology alone. The therapy process helped me understand that forgiveness was not about excusing my mother's choices, but about freeing myself from the anger that had been consuming my energy for years. I would never have a relationship with her again, but I no longer needed her absence to define my sense of worth or belonging. College became a source of joy rather than obligation as I pursued business and legal studies that would help me expand the foundation's impact. My professors were fascinated by the real-world experience I brought to theoretical discussions about corporate crime and victim advocacy. Dating remained complicated, as explaining my family history required careful navigation of trust and disclosure issues. But the foundation work introduced me to other survivors who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding life after systematic betrayal. Some of my closest friendships developed with people who had similar experiences of family trauma and recovery. The media attention from the case created opportunities to speak at conferences and universities about financial crime prevention and victim advocacy. These speaking engagements allowed me to share practical advice about recognizing manipulation tactics and protecting vulnerable family members from exploitation. But the most satisfying moments came from individual success stories of families we had helped. Receiving graduation photos from scholarship recipients, wedding invitations from survivors who had found love despite their trauma and birth announcements from parents who had rebuilt their lives after losing everything to criminal networks. 5 years after the arrests, I can say with certainty that justice was not just about punishment, but about restoration and prevention. Marcus and my mother received appropriate sentences for their crimes, but more importantly, we had built systems that would protect other families from similar exploitation. The foundation has now helped recover over $20 million for crime victims and prevented an estimated 50 construction accidents through safety advocacy and whistleblower protection programs. We have provided scholarships to over 200 students and legal assistance to more than 500 families. My father would be proud of the woman I became and the work I chose to pursue. His death was not meaningless if it ultimately led to protecting others from the same fate. His insurance money stolen and recovered through years of legal battles now funds programs that honor his memory through concrete help for families in crisis. Looking back on that terrible day at Miami International Airport, I can see it differently now. It was not the moment my family abandoned me. It was the moment I began building the family I actually deserved. Carmen Detective Williams Morrison and the hundreds of survivors we have worked with became my true family, connected not by blood, but by shared values of justice, protection, and healing. To everyone watching this story unfold, I want to ask, have you ever experienced betrayal that felt like the end of your world only to discover it was actually the beginning of something better? Have you found that justice sometimes comes not through revenge, but through building something meaningful from your pain? Drop a comment and share your own stories of overcoming family trauma or fighting for justice when everyone else gave up. Your experiences might inspire other survivors who need to know that healing and victory are possible. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find hope in their darkest moments. Subscribe for more stories about real people who refuse to let their circumstances define their futures. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up teaching us exactly who we were meant to become. Thank you for joining me on this journey from abandonment to justice. Remember that your worth is never determined by how others treat you, and sometimes the family that chooses you is stronger than the one that claimed you. Keep fighting for what is right. Keep protecting those who cannot protect themselves, and never underestimate the power of one person who refuses to accept injustice as inevitable.